Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I'm interviewing Dr. Shanna Swan, PhD, one of the world's leading environmental and reproductive epidemiologists and a professor of environmental medicine and public health. Today, we're going to talk about a variety of topics, particularly environmental chemicals called phthalates, her research on sperm count and quality, and especially her new book, Countdown, which discusses the decrease in fertility over time and what we can all do about it. So please stay tuned and enjoy the show. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure and honor of working with and interviewing a colleague and friend, Dr. Shanna Swan, PhD. She is one of the world's leading environmental and reproductive epidemiologists and a professor of environmental medicine and public health at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. She's also an award-winning scientist, and her work examines the impact of environmental exposures, including chemicals such as phthalates and bisphenol A, on men's and women's reproductive health and the neurodevelopment of children. We're going to talk with her about a lot of topics that we can squeeze in, but also her new book called Countdown, which was just recently released, how our modern world is threatening sperm counts, altering male and female reproductive development, and imperiling the future of the human race. On that exciting and happy note, welcome to the show, Dr. Swan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ailey, for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to see you again and to have a chance to talk to you about my book.
Yeah, this is wonderful. So I'm going to jump right in because I know we have a little bit of a time crunch. I want to start really briefly with the big picture item, which is give me an idea from your work in environmental chemicals, and we'll get into some of the more specific research that you've done that's led to this book. But give me a general picture of reproductive health in the world, in the United States, and also internationally, which is a lot of what your work involved.
So, Ailey, reproductive health is so broad, right? And involves men and women and their intersections. So when we talk about male reproductive health, a lot of people think sperm, and that's certainly a big part of it, but there's other endpoints as well. For example, testosterone levels, the size of the genitals, where the testes are, whether genital malformations. And then on the female side, we've got, pregnancy outcome, miscarriage, stillbirth, and so on. We have menstrual function, ovarian reserve, and premature ovarian failure, and age of menarche, and age of menopause. So what's interesting that what we've been finding, and what I've learned a lot about writing this book, is that many of those endpoints have deteriorated about the same rate. And the rate seems to be 1% per year. I didn't mention fertility because that one is shared between men and women. And that has been declining at the same rate as 1% per year. So we got a kind of a bleak picture, not a great picture for reproductive health. And it's around the world.
And you started, your history is really quite interesting how you even got into this. First of all, you started off as a mathematician, as I found out doing my prep. You started off as a mathematician, and then you somehow moved into biology. So tell me a little bit about that early decision to kind of move from, numbers and statistics into real, physiology and biology.
Our paths are always guided by strange occurrences. And I graduated with a PhD specializing in probability theory, which is a branch of statistics, but it's really mathematics. And for a number of reasons, I took an applied job. So my first job was in seismology. I studied earthquakes and how fast they travel under the Earth's surface and across, And so that was really interesting. And then pretty soon I got a job at the California Department of Health because they wanted somebody who was both a statistician and also open to doing epidemiology. So I raised my hand and I got the job. And the first thing I did was to study a really interesting problem in environmental and reproductive epidemiology. So this was a community in the Santa Clara area where people had been, concerned, particularly women. It's usually a woman, by the way, who brings this to up to attention, and she noticed a lot of miscarriages and birth defects among her neighbors. And so she asked whether it could be related to a spill that had occurred in the drinking water a little bit before that. And so she asked us if we could investigate that, and they sent me. So I went there to investigate that, and I saw that it was interesting, and I got the backing to do a study, and we ended up doing a series of studies. And so that was real straight out reproductive epidemiology, environmental epidemiology, public health, and I was launched into that career.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I read about that, and I thought that was really an interesting start to your career. I guess that was the early 80s. And then you started to look at some other interesting areas, specific classes of chemicals, and you stumbled across I guess you stumbled. Tell me how you got into the world of phthalates, because, that's really some of the biggest work that you're well known for up until this time, right? We all know that you're the phthalate researcher. In fact, you actually wrote a chapter with your partner, Dr. Andrade, I believe it is, for the textbook that I wrote in 2017 with Dr. Fred von Saal, or edited, I should say. So you really are that person. How did you get into phthalate studies, and what did you discover in terms of the phthalate, syndrome that really is something you're well known for, have researched?
Yeah, so this is another sort of serendipitous happening, if you will. I was flying to Japan with a colleague. He's a chemist from CDC. And he said to me, Shanna, you should study phthalates. And I was like, why and what are phthalates? So that was how ignorant I was, right? And so he told me that at CDC, they had figured out how to measure phthalates and many other environmental chemicals pretty cheaply in people's samples. And they had looked at how widespread phthalate exposure was, and it was almost everybody. So the exposure was definitely there. And then he said, and at the National Toxicology Program, they've shown that when a pregnant animal is exposed to some of these phthalates, the androgen and those testosterone lowering phthalates, when they're exposed early in pregnancy, then their boys are slightly under masculinized, and we can talk about what that is. But I thought that was fascinating, and he kind of piqued my interest, and I thought, well, could I look at that in humans? Because I don't do animal toxicology, I do human toxicology, right? So I happened to have a pregnancy cohort and women in whom we had saved the urine sample. And parenthetically, this is a great thing to do. I didn't know why I was saving that urine at the time, but I thought, get it, you're going to be able to use it. And here was the opportunity. So because we had the urine, we were able to ask how much phthalates were those women exposed to. And the way you do that, you measure the urine for a phthalate metabolite. So phthalates are water soluble, and so they're dumped into the urine, and then they sit there, and you send them to CDC, and CDC gives you a printout and says, here's how much of each of these phthalates were in the body of these women at the time they gave us this urine. So it's pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So to complete the question, I had to say, and what did it do? Right? And there are many, many, many things that these phthalates did. The first thing I looked at was what you alluded to, which was we decided to look for the phthalate syndrome in humans, that is in the babies of these mothers. And so to do that, we invited the mothers to bring their children in for an exam. And in that exam, we measured just what the rodent toxicologist had measured in the newborn rodents, right? So we looked for the size of the genitals and whether the testicles were all the way down in the scrotum and other defects. And then we looked for this measure, which you mentioned, and a lot of people won't be familiar with, anogenital distance. And we did see that just as in rodents, humans are affected by early prenatal phthalate exposure. In fact, we saw what had been called the phthalate syndrome in humans.
And just to clarify for the audience, anogenital distance is actually, or AGD is actually interesting because it's, as you mentioned, it's been measured in rodent studies, and it's the distance between the base of the shaft of the penis and the anus, right? That distance. And for men, it's larger than women in general in healthy humans. But it wasn't until, I guess, 2005 when you got involved that really started to look at humans and looking at that as a measure for phthalate exposure. So that was kind of like a home run in the sense that now you could actually have a hypothesis and kind of run with it in terms of that connection, which is pretty fascinating. And you said also, there's a critical window. Tell me about critical windows of exposures, because phthalates, by the way, for the audience, is also a group of plasticizing chemicals. They're used for a variety of products in cosmetics and cleaning products. They keep fragrances smelling longer and stronger. So we'll get into that at the end about what your recommendations are potentially for some of these, issues. But, as I mentioned, so just tell me a little bit about the timing of exposure and how that plays into a lot of this work.
Right. So I think people have known for quite a while that the body systems develop at different times in gestation. And when they're developing, they're most sensitive to an external toxin or other source of exposure. And so, fortunately, in the animal studies, they had teased this out really clearly. And they've identified a 3-day window in rodent gestation during which phthalates can do their damage. But actually, if exposure is only before that window or only after that window, there's very little impact. And so we were able to look at that. Actually, I didn't mention, but we actually replicated that whole study in another population, and 10 years later, and that study, which is called Tides, we knew a lot more what we were doing, and so in that study, we collected urine in each trimester so that we could look at this question. Did it matter more whether the mother was exposed in the first, second, or third trimester, right? And what we showed was that the shortening of the male anogenital distance only occurs when exposure is in the first trimester. So that did. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that was very consistent with the animal study and helped us establish causation because we had this beautiful match between the animal study and the human study. Yeah.
Yeah, which is brilliant because not everything extrapolates to humans, or at least we try to make that extension. But here you are talking about things, and actually this goes for a lot of other chemicals that we know about. You and I, BPA and dioxins and some other chemical groups that really there's a window where it actually can cause the greatest harm.
Well, let me just say that's the harmful window for genitals, and then for brain, it's not as precisely known, and the brain development is much longer. So there's it's not a precise narrow window. And then there's also different windows for thyroid function and other developmental endpoints. So the window is specific to the developmental period at which the system is developing. Yeah.
Which basically makes the punchline, well, when you're pregnant, it's very important to do the best you can to reduce those exposures.
And before you're pregnant. And before you're pregnant. Right. Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
And for your partner before you're pregnant, right? So I just want to say we only studied the female exposure, but there have been a number of studies that have looked at male and female exposure, and they can both contribute to impaired development.
Which brings me to my next point, which is really your point a lot of, it was so much pressure on women to sort of, to be fertile, to get pregnant, so much of that emphasis, and men walk around, oh, my sperm will last forever. I'm going to have kids up until I'm 70. We know a couple of famous actors that have had kids even 80, 90. I don't even know how high it goes. So tell me a little bit about what happened. Now the tables are turning, I guess, for you, and you're starting to look at men or sperm quality. What happened in 2017? Tell me about that paper that was kind of sort of eye-opening.
Yeah, so the paper that we published in 2017 was the culmination of a 20-year effort for me looking at the question of whether semen quality was declining. I started looking at that actually back in the late 1990s, because the National Academy of Sciences Committee I was on with Fred Ronzal asked me, could you look at this paper saying that sperm count had declined 50% in 50 years And I was skeptical. I was actually skeptical. So I happened to be on sabbatical. I could take the time, and I spent 6 months trying to make that trend go away, right? So I looked for biases and confounders, different kinds of men, different measures of sperm count, different obesity, smoking, age, blah, 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 blah. And after I put all of those things in the model, nothing had changed, Ailey. Nothing, not even to the first decimal place. It was exactly the same. All right. So that made it very unlikely that this was due to bias and confounding. It made it much more likely it was real. So I followed that story in various ways. And the culmination was the paper in 2017. So that was 25 years after the original 1992 paper. And we did it much better. We did it much bigger. We used meta-analytic methods. It's really solid. And the alarming thing is not only has there been a decline at 1% per year overall, 50% in 40 years, but it's not stopping. So how did we look at that, right? We looked at not only 40 years, but 30 and 20 and 10. And if it was slowing down, you'd see the slope gradually, decrease and flatten out, right? But we didn't see that. We saw the same strong trend continuing into the present, which is kind of alarming.
And according to the study, it was, a meta-analysis for our audience is really culminating a bunch of papers that are looking at clinical studies, really, right? Am I wrong on that? To look at a bigger picture, a bigger swath of men that when you were looking at sperm counts and sperm quality. So 40,000 men, I think, were included in that meta-analysis. Is that correct?
Something like that.
And you looked at basically between the years 1973 and 2011, so about 38 years worth, and you found a drop in 52.4% over that time period.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah, right. It's astounding. And that was in Western countries. So it wasn't all over the world, but it was in Western countries, not underdeveloped.
Right. We actually looked at all over the world, but that was the majority of the studies, 110 data points, because some had multiple points, in Western countries, and only 30 data points in underdeveloped countries. So there just wasn't enough data there. They weren't collecting sperm count. They weren't doing sperm count studies, basically. So that needs to be done.
But fascinating. I mean, and that really led you to do even more studies, right? In terms of figuring out, the connections between sperm decrease and things like mortality, testosterone levels. So tell me a little about those connections, because this is almost like the canary in the coal mine. You see a low sperm count, which, by the way, was fascinating. I read from another interview you actually were given, I think you were telling numbers about what's a normal sperm count range. Is that 15 million sperm per milliliter to 200? Yeah. And then low would be considered 15. Tell me a little about those numbers, and then tell me what you found out.
Yeah, so 15 million per milliliter is the WHO cutoff. And below that, they say you go see an infertility doctor. However, below 40 million per milliliter, the probability of conceiving on any particular month goes down dramatically. So I would, even though the WHO cutoff is 15, 40 is the operational cutoff for having problems, Yeah.
And that's great. Just to know those numbers, I think is interesting, because people, especially the men in the audience listening, will be like, oh no, they're going to start asking their urologist, what is my sperm count? It might be so these numbers are actually quite interesting. So keep going. Please tell me.
Well, the reason I think this is so important is that, first of all, men won't know their sperm count, even though they should. And I'll tell you why in a minute. And it's pretty easy compared to a woman. A woman, to know her egg count, Ailey, that's pretty complicated. It takes an ultrasound. It takes a lot of, that's not something that's done casually. But a sperm count you can get pretty easily. And so it's very surprising that more men don't know theirs. And so what we found, and you talked about the other spin-offs, if you will, the other reproductive endpoints that were in trouble, a lot of them, right? So infertility has declined at the same rate as sperm count, about 1% per year. Testosterone has declined at about the same rate, 1% per year. So this is a lot right there. And then genital birth defects in boys have gone up. In females, miscarriage rates have been increasing at about 1% per year. Premature ovarian failure. So wherever we've looked, we see this drumbeat, if you will, of 1% per year of things going south, if you will, and
not being able to replenish. I thought that was an interesting statistic. Yeah. So tell me, what did you find there with replenishing our human race?
Well, it takes 2 births per couple or woman that's the replacement level that we have to keep going at a constant population. And until recently, very many countries had much higher fertility rates. But that number is coming down all over the world. It's dropped from 5 children per couple to 2.4 children per couple worldwide since 1960. Okay, that's dramatic. And if you look at the heavily populated countries, they've gone down even faster. So when people say, well, in underdeveloped countries, they're still having huge numbers of children. Well, they did, and that's coming down really quickly. I think that's fine. That means that the women are getting educated. There was more contraception available. The locations are more urbanized. Those are all things that are associated with lower fertility rates. However, the bad news is that when you get on the low end of that and you get below 2.1 children per couple, you're going below replacement. And many countries, including us, are way below 2.1. And some countries like Korea and Singapore and Japan are getting close to 1.0. And this is really critical. And I will tell you, Ailey, that even though the governments have been making payments to couples to have more children, it's not going up. So there's a lot of work on this. What makes people, start to have more children? And we don't know how to do that. So we know how to take it down, and we may be going too low and not being able to bring it back up when we need it.
Yeah, it's really it's disheartening, but there are things though. Say you're a couple that's listening to this, man or woman, and you're trying to get pregnant. Can you tell me the connection between low sperm count and mortality in terms of increased risk for diabetes, heart disease, and cancers?
Yes. What we can think of low sperm count as maybe the 6th vital sign. Like blood pressure and cholesterol. This tells you something about your long-term health. So there have been a number of studies that have shown that in men with low sperm count and infertile men and women who have reproductive problems, there is greater risk of later morbidity, particularly heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And this has been shown in men more better documented than in women, that those men will die earlier.
That's really fascinating.
Sperm count predicts an earlier death. Is that important? Shouldn't you know that?
Yeah, I actually was just going to ask you if it should be considered another vital sign when you go to your primary care doctor once a year. Should you be getting sperm counts as a sort of an identifier of poor health, or phthalate exposure, or endocrine disruption exposure? So it's very telling. But what can men do? I mean, women, they may have more things to manage when it comes to their ovaries, but men really get a clean slate, don't they? Because they constantly producing sperm. So tell me a positive. Tell me what men out there who want to pick up their sperm quality and count and want to feel virile and not necessarily buy into testosterone and some of these other ways that men are trying to compensate. Tell me what are your recommendations?
So you're absolutely right that new sperm are produced all the time, takes about 70 days. And if you want to start with a clean slate, you should try to conceive maybe 70 days from now. And right now you can start taking action. So you can stop smoking if you're smoking, and try to avoid passive cigarette smoke. You can not binge drink if you have a tendency to that on a weekend. Try to avoid binge drinking. There's some risk associated with heavy marijuana use as well. And you can, good luck on this one, try to reduce your stress levels, because stress is really important for sperm count. I would suggest you avoid saunas and hot tubs because heat is known to be related to semen quality. And you should be careful about what you eat. So you want to eat healthy, basic. You want to eat a Mediterranean diet. That is, you want to have olive oil, but not saturated fats. You want to keep your meat consumption down, and you want to eat organic to the extent that you can. I would say you want to avoid fragrance products in your home and in your personal care products and in your cleaning products and laundry products. And anybody who has a question about a particular product, I suggest they go to Environmental Working Group and just go to a consumer guide and put that product in there, and you'll get a readout of what the risks of that product are. So those are some steps that people can take.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I think I also read in your book, which, by the way, I hope people will run out and get because it's really eye-opening and really powerful. So people can actually make some real changes. The heat being an issue and exercise, I saw something about biking in there, and I found that was really interesting because we promote, at least in my world as an integrative medicine physician, exercise, lifestyle, diet, sleep, reduction of stress. But it turns out that because of that heat, that sauna, as you mentioned, may not be a good idea, but also, biking. Maybe there's an alternative.
Yeah, well, excess exercise, both on the male and the female side, are problematic. As you know, Ailey, the women who are have this syndrome of overexercising, basically, they stop menstruating, and that's not good for your reproductive health. And men who exercise really heavily, particularly on the bike, will also lower their sperm count. So just keep away from the excess, but don't stop exercising, because couch potato behavior is also a risk factor for low sperm count. So it's a sweet spot, not too much, not too little. Yeah,
that's interesting. You talked about the female athlete triad, which is actually one of my most favorite topics when I was in medical school, learning about that, because it's that triad of amenorrhea, anorexia, and low body weight. And that tells the body anthropologically, which I love talking about anthropology and where we are now as compared to where we are for 2 million years of evolution. It shuts down a woman's ability to ovulate because your body can't sustain and create a healthy child. And so we have these telltale evolutionary signs. How do you think anthropology, the big picture of anthropology, makes us look right now, considering we really have had, in the course of 4.5 million years, 90,000 chemicals added to our lives in just the last couple of 100 years?
I would say probably most of the chemicals have been added in the last 70 years. Possibly 100. But they surged, after the Second World War. There was a tremendous surge in the production of chemicals. Anthropologically, I think there's been some good things and some bad things. So I think one good thing is perhaps what we're seeing now is the decline in testosterone. Even though that may be scary for individual men, I think as a society, it's making us a less aggressive population. And there's books about this. Steven Pinker, for example, has written about this. So I think this is a, positive evolutionary change. I think that, unfortunately, a lot of the demands of our modern life, which keep us sedentary and limit our motion, limit our exercise, have not been helpful to our reproductive or other health. And stress, I don't know how we can, how that would compare. I don't know what stress was like, prehistorically or historically, but I can't believe that it was worse than we have now. So, and stress.
It was being at a water hole and having a water buffalo come up to drink next to you. I think that was the extent of it.
Yeah, but stress is we in our studies we looked at self-reported stress, and it was a huge predictor of low sperm count. So, and this is seen in women as well. So it's good luck in saying lower your stress levels, but to the extent that you can, through possibly meditation or yoga or taking some time for exercise, that's only going to be to the good for your reproductive health, as well as your heart and the rest of your well-being. Yeah.
I wanted to read a couple of the memes that are part of your book marketing that I just thought were really powerful. So I'm just going to read them off. Worldwide, fertility has dropped more than 50% over the past 50 years and is continuing to decline. The second one I really thought was important. A man today has only half the number of sperm his grandfather had. And another important one, in many parts of the world, a woman in her 20s today is less fertile than her grandmother was at 35. And I think these are really, this is important research that you've done. And congratulations on putting together such a remarkable book. I wish you all the success in the world. And I wanted to, number one, thank you for being here, but I want you to share with the audience something about you that we might not know, just from your book tour and all your research and all the awards and accolades you've received.
Some hidden tidbit about myself?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I actually was an actress as a child. And I'm in New York right now, and I was in New York then, and I went to the High School of Performing Arts. And it was a great thing to do at the time. And now I'm glad I'm doing science, but it gave me a lot of confidence to speak to people. And I'm happy to speak to you right now, Ailey.
No song and dance? Come on, Shanna, we want to finish strong. Where's your hat and
No,
your
actually,
cane?
I never did song and dance, honestly. I was a serious actress. So,
Okay. Well, but honestly, that's fascinating. And yes, I'm glad it only serves you well because you have a lot of personal appearances ahead of you, especially with this book. So best of luck to you. Thank you again for being on the show and taking time out of your very busy schedule right now. And, I hope to work with you and see more of your research coming out in the future because it's really a benefit to all of us, all of mankind to keep our fertility and to keep us going and being healthy. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Ailey. And I want to say I'm very happy to have this time with you and to be able to get to know you a little more. And I hope we can continue to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care, Shanna.